Dear friends, welcome back to my channel. Let's read. From the timeless collection of Ismat Chugtai, let's read The Wheel, also known as Ghungat. Before beginning, don't forget to subscribe the channel. So let's begin with the story. Seated on a divan covered with a white sheet, her hair whiter than the wings of her heron, Grandma looked like an awkward mass of marble. It seemed as though there was not a single drop of blood in her body. White had crept up to the edges of her grey eyes, which, lustreless, reminded one of casements that were barred of windows, hiding fearfully behind thick curtains. Her presence shrouded in what could be linked and liked to a stationary cloud of finely ground silver. She was dazzling, and a snowy white, blinding radiance seemed to emanate from her person. Her face shone with a glow of purity and chastity. This 80-year-old virgin had never known the touch of a man's hand. She was like a bouquet of flowers at 13, with a hair that fell below her waist, and a complexion that shimmered with youthful silkiness and translucence. But her youth had been ravaged by time. Only the softness now remained. Her beauty was of such renown in those days that her parents, afraid she might be whisked away by jinns, couldn't sleep at night. Indeed, she didn't appear to be of this world. At 14, she became engaged to my mother's uncle. He was dark, and she was fair, although otherwise he was exceedingly well proportioned and manly in appearance. What a sharply delineated nose he had, just like the blade of a sword, with eyes that were ever watchful, his teeth a string of pearls. But he was unusually sensitive about his inky complexion. During the engagement celebrations, everyone began teasing him. Oh dear, the bride will be tarnished by the groom's touch. It will be like an eclipse of the moon. Kali Mia, he was a stubborn, immature 17-year-old at the time. Terrified by all this talk about his bride-to-be's beauty, he ran away to his maternal grandfather's house in Jodhpur. There, hesitatingly, he admitted to his friends that he didn't want to get married. In those days, defiance was dealt with severely, and a beating or two was not at all uncommon. Under no circumstances could an engagement be terminated. Such an act would bring eternal shame upon the family. And what was wrong with the bride to be? Anyway, just that she was exceedingly beautiful. The world idolized beauty, and here he was, manifesting extreme bad taste by spurning it. Oh, she's very arrogant, he confessed. And how do you know? There was no proof, but beauty is known to beget arrogance, and it was impossible that Kale Mia should submit to arrogance. He was not accustomed to submitting to the will of others. A concerted effort was made to explain to him that once she was his wife, Goribi would become his possession and comply with his every wish. She would say day if she wanted to, and night if he wished to. Thus, she would sit whenever he made her sit and stand up if he ordered her to do so. Some physical force was also employed to coerce Kali Mia into returning home, and finally the wedding took place. The woman, singing wedding songs, sang of a fair bride and a dark groom. As if that were not enough to incense Kali Mia, someone recited a poem in which a stinging allusion was made to his dark complexion. This proved to be the last straw. However, nobody took this indignation seriously, and presuming that he was in tune with the spirit of fun that prevailed, they continued to jokingly tease him. When, like a sword out of its sheath, ready for attack, he entered the bridal chamber and saw the bride, who was enmeshed in glittering red flowers, he broke out in a sweat. Her pale, silken hands made his blood boil, and he was overcome by an overpowering desire to grind in his blackness with her whiteness, so that the difference between them could be obliterated forever. The bride bent over as he extended his hands towards her wheel. All right then, you lift the wheel yourself, he said. The bride dropped her head lower. Lift your wheel, he ordered her sharply. The bride was all rolled up like a ball now. Oh, such arrogance, hmm? The bridegroom slipped his shoes under his arm, jumped out of the window which opened onto the garden, made directly for the station and from there to Jodhpur. The women in the family knew the bride had not been touched, and it was not long before the news reached the men. Kalemia was interrogated. She's defiant, he proclaimed. And how do you know that? I told her to lift her wheel, and she ignored my request. Oh, you fool! Don't you know a bride does not lift her own wheel? Why didn't you do it yourself? Never. I have sworn. If she will not lift her wheel, she can go to hell. You are stupid to ask her to lift her wheel herself. Next thing you know, you will be wanting her to take the initiative for everything else. What a damn stupid idea. There was no question of divorce in those days. Once married, you stayed married. Kalemia disappeared for 7 years, but he continued to send money to his mother. Goribi, his bride, was suspended between her parents' home and that of her in laws. Her parents were deeply shocked by the tragedy that had befallen on their daughter. They were hurt. What was wrong with the girl that the bridegroom had not touched her? Who had heard of such injustice? In order to prove his manhood, Kalemia indulged in all the vibes that were available to him. He consorted with prostitutes and homosexuals, and among other things, spent time as a pigeon fancier. All this while, Goribi quietly smoldered away behind her wheel. When his mother fell seriously ill, Kalemia came home, considering this to be a stroke of good fortune. The elders made another attempt to bring the bride and groom together. Once again, Goribi was clothed in bridal attire, but Kalemia said, I've sworn on my mother's life I will not lift her wheel. Everyone reasoned with Goribi. Now, girl, this is going to affect your whole life. Set your modesty aside, stir up some courage, and raise your wheel yourself. There's nothing indecent about this. He's your husband, your earthly god. It is your duty to obey him. Your freedom lies in doing as he says. Once again, the bride was adorned, the nuptial bed was decorated, pulao, sweet rice were cooled, and once more the bridegroom was pushed into the bridal chamber. Goribi was a flowering beauty of 21 now. She exuded the warmth of womanhood. Her eyelids dropped heavily. Her breath came fast. For 7 years she had dreamt of this particular night. Friends had whispered secrets that made her heart beat wild. As soon as Kalemia's eyes fell upon the bride's henna-covered hands and feet, he felt emotion take control of him. His bride sat before him, not an unopened bud of 14, but a full-blown bouquet. Desire melted him. The night was sure to be filled with delights. Restive, his experienced body yearned for her like a tiger anticipating its prey. Although he had never seen her face, an image of his wondrous bride had tormented him, even when he was with other women. Lift your wheel, he said tremulously. There was not the slightest movement. Lift your wheel, he murmured in a pleading, tearful voice. The silence remained unbroken. If you don't do as I say, I'm never going to show you my face again. The bride did not stir. Kalemia knocked the bedroom window open with a jab of his fist and jumped out into the garden. Gone that night, and he never returned to her. Goribi, the untouched bride, waited 30 years for him. Gradually, nearly all the elders in her family died. It was while she was staying with an old aunt of her in Fatehpur Sikri that she learned about the bridegroom's return. After leading a life of indiscriminate debauchery, Kalemia had returned home burdened with disease. On his deathbed, he requested that Goribi come to him so that he could die in peace. When she received Kalemia's message, Goribi leaned against a pillar for a long time, unmoving and silent. Then she went to her old trunk, took out her tattered wedding suit, and put it on, applied bridal oil to some of her grey hair, and her long veil cradled between her hands. She arrived at the side of the dying patient. Lift your veil, Kalimia whispered convulsively. Goribi's trembling hands reached up towards her veil and fell. Kalimia had taken his last breath. That very moment, Goribi calmly sat down on the floor beside his bed, smashed her glass bangles against the bedpost, and instead of the bridal veil, pulled the white veil of the widowhood over her head. Dear friends, this is the end of the beautiful story. Please stay tuned for another more stories from the timeless collection of Ismat Chugtai. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe the channel.